rendering. We're going to look at different ways to build your walls, your ceilings, and putting in different windows and doors, doing some custom trim work with those, and then how to apply different finishes to those items, bringing in custom materials and custom elements while we do that. And then we're going to look at visualizing the space that we're designing, putting it into 3D view, creating some photorealistic renderings, discussing animations with those two, and all the best practices for all of those different portions of our software that we're going to be discussing. Once we're done the formal presentation part of our webinar together today, we're going to open up the chat panel. So if there's any questions that you have about rendering and designing in the software, you can put those out there and I'll be able to answer them at the end of the class. Let's get started on our design and rendering webinar and doing our best practices. And again, as we're doing the webinar, if a question pops up, type it out right away so that at the very end of the webinar, when we start going through all the questions, they're all there lining up and ready for me, and I'll be able to get started on them right away. So the first portion of our class today is talking about designing and putting in all of your elements accurately and how to bring in custom elements for them. So the first thing I want to start talking about is the designing of the walls themselves. So I'm going to click on the Walls tool here, and when we do that, obviously the catalog panel to the right is going to update and show us all of our wall choices. I want to show you different ways to insert your walls into your design. So depending on the information that you have, you can use one of these different formats to draw your initial design. I'm going to grab this stone wall from our catalog and move my cursor out onto the drawing screen. When I bring my cursor out into the drawing screen to start my initial design, I always use the baseline tool for inputting the exterior walls. So as soon as I bring my cursor out onto the drawing screen, I'm going to right-click right away. And right-clicking in the software always reveals choices. So my choice here that I want to choose is the Insert by Baseline method for my walls. So I'm going to select that option. Cursor still looks like regular walls that I'm going to be designing. I'm going to left-click to start. When I start drawing the walls, I'm using this baseline method. It's originally going to start off with just a line. And as I pull my cursor to the right, you can see down at the bottom of my screen, it has distance and direction. So I'm going to type in there 34 feet and hit enter, and one line appears. As I move my cursor up, you can see that it's actually forming a polygon shape. It's always going to bring itself right back to that very start point. So I just have to tell it all of the different lengths of all the different sides of my building. So as I'm moving my cursor up towards the top of my screen, I'm going to type in 32 feet. And then I'm going to move my cursor over and type 12 feet, move it up, type 2 feet, move it across, I'll type 10 feet, move it down, I'll type 2 feet, and then I'll move it across. Now, depending on the information that you have, if you're just free-form sketching at this point, and you've went around all these different dimensions, and you know now at this point you want to bring yourself back to that start point, and you want to do it in a nice straight line, instead of having to calculate what that distance would be, that's when I would take advantage of our Snap Track tool. Our Snap Track tool allows me to hover my cursor over a particular point, like our very first start point there, and I'm just moving my cursor over that start point. I'm not left-clicking, I'm just moving it in that direction. And when I do, you can see that that little black square appears, and that's the Snap Track, showing you the point that I've defined that I want to snap to. And as I pull my cursor away, you'll see that dashed line, show me that I'm perfectly in line with that point, and the distance that I would have to go over to be in line with that point. So I just left-click to accept that distance of 12 feet, and I have my last point in. Then I right-click and tell it that I'm finished outlining the exterior shell of my building. The dialog box for the Walls by Baseline tool appears. What it's asking here is the line that I just drew, the 34 feet by 32 foot kind of footprint for the building, what does that line represent? That 32 feet that I typed in, Is that from veneer to veneer? So would that be from siding to siding, stucco to stucco, brick to brick on the outside of the building? Are the dimensions I typed in my stud placement? So is that outside of stud to outside of stud? Or is that inside face of stud to inside face of stud? So you can use any of these methods depending on the dimensions that you know. So if you're thinking of a remodel situation, you've been on site, you went inside the building, and you've maybe taken away all of the interior dimensions. Well, then you can tell it that it's the inner face of stud with a 1/2 inch offset. This offset option down here below allows you to go to one of those other options for the wall itself, not just the stud or the veneer. Maybe you want to go to sheathing on the exterior of the wall, or maybe to the inside face of the drywall. You can use any of those options. For our option today, all of the dimensions that I typed in are actually going to the outside face of the veneer. So I'm going to make that selection and I'm going to click OK. As soon as I tell it that that's OK, then you can see that the building appeared. Now that I have that building, I can start to do my further design. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to start putting in some of my interior walls. So again, I'm going to click on that wall tool, go over to the catalog panel to the right, scroll down, and tell it that I want a 2x6 interior wall that is load-bearing. Move my cursor back onto the drawing screen. And I want you to watch my cursor as I move it close to one of the corners. As it gets right up into that corner, you can see that my cursor changes. It becomes a circle with an X. It means it's snapping to that corner. And that's very important. When you're designing in the software, always wait and hesitate when you want two walls to connect to make sure that you see that circle with an X. If you don't see it, that means they're not seeing each other in a connection, and you're not going to have a nice, clean intersection at that corner. So always take a moment, see the circle with an X, left click then, and then pull. And as I pull down to the wall below, that perpendicular wall, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to wait, see the circle with an X. When I see it, I left click. Okay, so to repeat that, move your cursor up into the corner where you want to start the wall, wait for the circle with an X, left click, pull down. I'm going to see the circle with an X again, left click, it's there. I'm going to go back into my catalog and switch up my type of wall. Now I'm going to put in some 2x4 interior walls. And the next wall that I want to put in, I want it to be 16 feet away from that corner, that upper corner of that interior wall that I just put in. So as you can see, as I move my cursor down, it's showing me just how far I am away from that corner. I have my precision set so that I'm working within the 16th of an inch. So trying to be very precise on pulling myself an exact distance away from a corner can be very difficult. So I want to make sure I take advantage of our offset tool. Doesn't matter where my cursor is, as long as it's in the drawing screen area, I'm going to right click. And when I right click again, it's going to bring up my options for inserting walls. The option that I want to take advantage of this time is the last option that you see in the list, Enter Insertion Offset. What is the distance that I want to offset from a corner to insert my next wall? Enter Insertion Offset. So I'm going to type that I want it to be exactly 16 feet away from a corner. And then I click OK. Now, it doesn't matter where I put my cursor, it'll always show me how to be 16 feet away from the different corners that it sees. So I'm going to move it up into this corner right here. That's where I wanted to have the distance showing there from that corner. That's where I wanted the 16 feet. As soon as I see that dimension, my cursor doesn't have to be at the lower edge of that 16-foot dimension line extension. It can be anywhere. As soon as I see the dimension, I left click, and my cursor will jump all the way down there for me. And then I pull across, wait, hesitate to see that circle with an X, so I know that it's a nice clean intersection, and I left click. Okay, we'll do that one more time just so we're sure everybody understands the offset tool, because it's very handy in your designs. Right click, Enter Insertion Offset. The Enter Insertion Offset dialog box pops up, wants to know the distance you want to be away from a corner. I'm going to tell it this time 12 feet. I click OK. Now any wall that I put my cursor along will show me the 12-foot distance. As soon as I see it in the position where I want it to be from that corner, I left click. And then I can pull because my cursor is going to jump to that point, and I left click again to end that wall. I'm going to right click and choose finish. I've completed drawing the walls using the wall command. But another way of creating a wall is duplicating a wall that's already created. So I'm going to left click to select this wall right here. When you select a wall that's been drawn already, you can see that dimensions appear. There's that 16-foot dimension. I want to be 16 feet away from that corner. It's exactly 16 feet away. I see a green grip, I see a blue grip, and I see a red grip on top of that wall. The green grip represents where I started drawing this wall. The blue grip represents the midpoint of that wall. And the red point at the very end of it is where I stopped drawing that wall. Those also have other significance that I'm going to point out later when we start doing the trim along these different walls and the different finishes. You'll also notice if I right click, I have a number of different options that I can do to this wall. The one that we want to take advantage of right now is the duplicate option. I want to duplicate this wall. So I'm going to select duplicate. Notice again my cursor change. In all the different commands in the software, the cursor is always going to change and let you know exactly what command you're in and what you're doing. So right now my cursor, looking like 4 arrows, is telling me that I'm ready to pick up and move a copy of that wall to a different location. So I'm going to put my cursor right on top of that wall, right on that blue midpoint grip. And holding down my left mouse button and not letting go, I'm going to drag a copy down. I'm just going to drop it anywhere below it. Because, and the reason I just drop it anywhere, as soon as I drop it, I have these really handy dimensions that appear so I can exactly position that extra wall that I just created. I could have typed in a distance that I wanted that wall to be away from the existing wall. But when you're in that move and duplicate situation, it's always going to move it from the center line to the center line. And I know the distance between each wall that I want it to be 3 feet. So I just drop it quickly and then edit the dimension instead. Okay. Once walls are inserted, as they intersect other walls, they actually hinge off of those points. So you can see that one first very long interior wall that I first inserted. Now that I have those perpendicular interior walls running up against it and intersecting it, it's no longer one long wall. It sees itself as different pieces of wall. So with this one selected, this one piece, if I hit delete, it's only going to delete out that one section. I just hit delete on my keyboard, and now that piece of wall is gone. The other portions there remain. That also allows you to have different finishes on different points of a wall. I'm going to left click this wall right here. This is the first one that we made the duplicate from. I'm going to right click to reveal the options for that wall. And we very specifically want to look at the properties of this wall. So I'm going to select properties, and it'll bring up the walls dialog box. This will tell me the information about the wall itself. What I want to very specifically look at today for our webinar is the Trim and the Appearance tab. Under the Trim tab, when we're dealing about designing this space, the walls that we've inserted automatically can have trim associated to them as well. So as I was drawing those interior walls, it automatically put on some MDF baseboard for me. It automatically would case around any openings that I would put into the walls themselves as well. Looking further down in our list, we could also put in some custom trim. We could put in a window sill. We could put in some crown molding and some chair rail. You'll notice that all of these selections are dealing with the left interior surface. And in the list that we have there, There's also the right, and if this was an exterior wall, we could also deal with the exterior portion of this wall. So what makes part of that wall the left and the right of that wall when I'm dealing with a horizontal wall and I'm looking at it? Well, you situate yourself like you're standing on the green dot, looking towards the red dot. And when you're standing looking from that green dot to the red dot, you'll have your left hand and you'll have your right hand. So that'll be your left hand portion of the wall and the right hand. So why do we have different finishes for each side of the wall? Well, when we look at the case of the wall that we've drawn and that we've selected, the left-hand portion of the wall is going to be inside this room. The right-hand portion is going to be inside the closet. So on the room side, the left-hand side, maybe we want some crown molding. Maybe we want a different type of baseboard altogether. This allows us to have two different finishes on each wall, depending on that room. That left and right-hand side is also the same for the appearances that we're going to look at next. That maybe on the left-hand side of that wall, where we're inside that one room, we want one paint color. And on the other side of the wall, maybe we want wallpaper or a different color altogether. By having a left and a right-hand side of the wall, we can have those different finishes. So dealing with this left interior surface of this particular wall that we've drawn right now, let's go ahead and define some crown molding for it. So I left-click to select the crown option in my trim list, and then to the right of that, I see the select button. And I'm going to click on that select button because it's going to allow me to go into my catalog and select a piece of trim that I want to associate to this particular wall. Long list of different types of trim. There's some baseboard, some casing. Here we'll look at our crown molding. And we have all different profiles of crown molding in our list. If there isn't a piece of crown molding in the list that matches the style that you want to use, you can always create your own custom profiles as well. I'm going to right-click here in this list. Anytime you're in the catalog, you can always, no matter if it's in an access window like this or in the full catalog at the right-hand side of your screen that's always there, you can always right-click in that catalog, and it gives you the ability to add new element types. So I want to add a new type of crown molding, or I could edit one of the ones that are already there and change it so that it suits the needs that I have. So we're going to add a new custom profile right now. So up at the top, I'm just going to call this one New Crown Molding. I always recommend, and for today's webinar you can see I just called it New Crown Molding, but I do always recommend that you give them very definite names, because the names itself are going to appear in the catalog, and if this had a very definite name that it's 1/2 inch MDF crown molding or whatever material we're going to use, when I'm looking through my catalog, it's very apparent which one I want to use because of the size and the style and everything you've put into that name. Another reason for giving it a very definite name when you're creating new and designing new elements is we have a description tool as well for the working drawing portion, and it will pick right up on that descriptive name and publish it right onto your working drawings for you. So the better the name, the better the drawings are going to be at the very end, and the more you can take advantage of those automatic names. So I'm just going to call mine, just to be generic today for our class, I'll just call it New Crown Molding. Below that, you can see that I can have just a rectangular shape, just a block, and give it a width and a height, or I can have a custom shape. And today we're going to use a custom shape. Within that custom shape, it has to know, well, how wide is it and how tall is it? And that's where we can give it this width and height in the properties of this piece of crown. Below that, you'll see that Select Profile button. And by clicking on that Select Profile button, it'll take us into different profiles that we can choose from. So we can see all of these profiles of all these different crowns. And it takes that profile and chisels it into that trim member so it has that exact same shape. And again, if there's nothing in here that suits your needs, you can always right-click and add a new profile. In this Profile Properties dialog box, I'll just give it a new profile name to be generic, but again, be specific when you're doing your own work. I'm going to remove all of the pieces that made up this one piece of profile that was there, just hitting the remove button. And then what we do is we define it by distances. So I'm going to say I want to go over a 1 unit in the 0 direction. So I hit insert, and we can see that line go through. Now I'm going to tell it that I want to go 1 unit, and I want to go in the 90-degree direction. So I type 90 as the angle, and then I hit insert, and we can see that happening. Now I'm going to tell it that I want to go over 0.5 units, and I want to go in the 180-degree direction, insert, and then I'm going to go down 0.5 in the 270-degree direction, insert. My last one, I want it to be a radius, and I'm going to tell it, you can tell it the direction, right or left, and then I'm just going to hit close, and it will close that off. So I could have a piece of straight trim with a piece of quarter round kind of shape going on here. So you can create your own profiles even, and that profile would translate itself. When I click OK here and pick that profile, it automatically adds itself in as that trim member. Okay, so you can always design any kind of shape that you need using this profile. It's a very, very handy tool, or use any of the ones that you see as part of our drawings that are already done. All the ones that you see in the list that I have are part of our shipping catalog, so you'll have access to all of those same ones in your catalog as well. Okay, so I'm going to define this new crown molding. I'm going to click OK and to select it, and now it's been added to the left side of that wall, so I'll see that crown molding added into that particular wall on that one side of that wall. Okay, I'm going to click on the Appearance tab now. The Appearance tab deals with the appearance of the wall both in 3D and in 2D. So today we're going to deal with just the 3D aspect of it, the finished materials that we're going to see on that wall. And then we have another webinar coming up next month on working drawings, and we'll be dealing with the 2D portions in that webinar. So when I highlight the exterior surface in the component list to the left, I can see the material that it's associating to all of these different items. So if this had an exterior surface to it, it wasn't just an interior wall, I would see the stone perhaps. But right now it's showing me plywood. So if I put this right up against a wall, exterior portion of the wall, the other side of it would be plywood. When I click on the left interior surface, we get to see the paint color that's been selected. And there's the right surface. So by clicking on this material swatch that you see associated to each of those surfaces, if I click on that swatch, it'll take me into a catalog where I can select a different type of material if I wanted to. So I can scroll through the list of all the various materials and select one that I would rather use. And when I click OK, now that material is being used by Shaker Beige. Okay? The left interior surface is still using that woodstock tan. So this is where that wall is getting its looks from, both in the trim component and here is the appearance. What materials are being used? These are all just JPEGs that we're applying along that wall. Later on in our broadcast today, we're going to look at creating a new material, and we're going to apply it to a rug that we're going to be putting in one of the rooms. So you can see how you can bring in your own custom materials as well. So I'm going to click OK and accept all of our changes. And the change we made to that one interior wall was on the left-hand side. We added a custom piece of crown molding. And on the right-hand side, we changed the paint color. That will be all of the different changes that we're going to make to that particular wall. Okay. Also into these walls, you saw that it had casing. We can bring in different openings into this wall. To do that, I'm going to click on this door tool. Catalog panel now will update itself and show various door styles that are available. So I'm going to choose just some different doors for our design here just to get it going. I'll grab this door and I want to put it into this wall. To do that, I have a number of different choices. Again, just like with the wall insertion. I can just bring my cursor along an existing wall that's part of my design already, and you can see it's going to show me the distance away from each corner. Or if I right-click, again, anywhere on the screen, it doesn't have to be right on that wall. It just has to be in the drawing portion of the software. If I right-click, you can see I have two different options here. I can use an insertion offset, exact same tool as what we had with the walls. How far away from a corner do I want this particular door? Or I can tell it that I want to center it on this wall. I'm going to choose Center on Wall, and then I can left-click and place in the door. If I wanted the door to be a specific distance away from a corner, I'll just pick a 32-inch interior door. I can right-click again, and this time I would use that Enter Insertion Offset. When I'm using this tool, again, type a distance that you want to be away from a corner. So I'm going to tell it that I want to be 6 inches away from a corner, and click OK. It will remember that offset of 6 inches that I just typed in every time I go to put this door in until I tell it that I'm done putting in doors. So if I left-click, next door that I do, you can see that it's 6 inches away from the corner. So every door is going to have a 6-inch trim return. Left-click, right-click, tell it that I'm finished inserting doors. If a door goes in, or perhaps the swing is wrong, so let's take a look at this door here in the lower right. I come into the room, I face a wall. I want to come into the room and face the room. So I select the door. I right-click to reveal options that I have for that one door, and I tell it that I want it to flip the swing. Okay. This door right here, what if I want it to be all the way down the wall over here to this corner? I can select on those dimensions that appear as well. So I'm going to select on that dimension and tell it that I want it to be 6 inches away from this corner. And it'll move the door all the way down there. And then again, right-click, flip the swing. So once you have doors inserted, you can always move them around and change their position as well. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger on my screen by using my zoom window tool. That's that tool that I'm circling around in the lower right-hand corner of my screen. It allows me to hold down my left mouse button, and whatever I've drawn the little box around, as soon as I release the mouse button, it magnifies it on the screen for me. Next, I'm going to click on our window tool. It functions in the exact same manner as our door tool. So I would go over to my catalog panel to the right. I would choose the style of window that I wanted to insert. Right-clicking will reveal that I can center it along a wall. So I can keep centering it until tell it that I'm done with the centering option of this particular tool. You can see that I can center it on the inside face of the wall, but by moving my cursor towards the outside, I can also center it along the exterior face of the wall. So depending on where you want it to go, you can use either option. I'm going to center this one here. Now, I'm going to zoom in on this back wall. I inserted this window on the left by centering it along the outside edge. I inserted this window on the right by centering it on the inside edge. You can see by changing that method, it also moved the window. This one has the trim right here along the stud wall, and this one has it put towards the outside. So depending on where you want to place the window, you can then take that window, select it, right-click, and that's where you can choose flip opening. Just like we had with the doors, flip swing and flip opening, we also have flip opening for the windows. So I could center it along one edge and then flip it to the other one. But what if I wanted to bring in a nice custom window from a certain manufacturer? They've drawn them up in 3D for you. They're supplying the 3D blocks. How can I get that window into the software? Well, I'm going to go up to here to File, pull down Menu, and I'm going to go to Import, and I'm going to bring in an object, a 3D object. That window has been drawn as a 3D object. I want to bring it in. Object Wizard. I tell it that it is my new window. Again, I'm using generic names, but you will use very specific names when you're bringing in new objects, so they know exactly what they are. I give it a name, and I tell it what it is. Well, I'm bringing in a new window, so I'm going to store this element that I'm bringing in as a window. and then I go out to my hard drive and I select it. So I can see that if I go up to my downloads folder, I've got some different ones out here. I'm going to go to Cloverleaf. I want this Cloverleaf window, and I'm going to click open. Now we can see that Cloverleaf window that I've found. I'm going to hit next. When the person originally drew that window, and maybe I should step back a moment here. When I selected that window to draw, the block types that we accept and you can use in the software, you can bring in a DWG 3D block. You can use a SketchUp block, which has a file extension of SKP. You can also bring in a 3DS file, and that's a 3D Studio file. So if your window manufacturer or door manufacturer, doors can be brought in the same way, are producing their stock as DWG, SketchUp, or 3D Studio files, you can bring them directly into our software. Moving forward again there. Now that someone's drawn that block, now what I have to do is orientate it the correct way. They might have, when they were drawing it in SketchUp or AutoCAD, drawn it so that it was sitting flat, but we need it to sit in the window. So I'm going to hit this down arrow to move and tilt the window up in the right orientation. And then I can offset it, because you can see the window itself. When I bring it in, it's going to place it along this edge, this corner of this window, right into the wall. So if you want to move that insertion point, you can change where the Z value is here, and also the frame offset. If I wanted to move it, half an inch one way or the other, I can do that and tell it that frame offset. Okay. Next, I want to know, did they draw a bunch of extra information with this block that I might want to turn off in 3D? You can close these eyes, and that will turn them off, so when you bring them in, you don't see all that extra garbage that they might have drawn with it. When you're bringing in blocks like this, it's nice to have a really good 2D representation of it as well. So I'm going to slice through this block to show it the furthest extent of how far out this window actually goes, and it'll give me the details of the trim and the window glass that's in there, so I get a nice looking 2D representation. I just hit this plus sign to add it to my list of what I want to see when I'm going through in a 2D plan view. Then I hit next and finish, and a copy of that window you can see attaches to my cursor. And I can left click to insert it. Okay. It has the same options as our other windows and doors, so I could have centered it or offset it away from a corner as well. But there's our new window. Okay, so we can insert all of those various windows and doors as well that might be custom, and you can bring those in. And move back out. Beside our window tool, we have our openings tool, and this is just a cased opening. So I'm going to grab a cased opening here. I'll just go to a rectangular opening, and let's go to rectangular doorways, 5 foot by 6 foot 8. I'm just going to move it into this wall right here by right-clicking and telling it I want it to center it along this wall. So I have the basic outline and shape of my floor plan now. Design that out. Now, something that I always recommend is taking advantage of the Save command. File, Save. Save your work at strategic points. Every time you draw walls, save them. Every time you get your windows in, save them. So you know you've got the file saved at that point. So I'm just going to call today's webinar and hit Save. Okay, so now I've saved it, and it's called webinar.bld. From here, the next thing I want to do, designing this out, I might want to show this to a client, is worry about the finishes. So I'm just going to put it into a 2D designer's view. So that's this 2D down here in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. That's green, 2D designer's view. This type of view allows you to look at your model, still looking top-down in a floor plan type of view, but it's also showing you the finished materials that it's going to be putting down as well. So in this type of view, I can see the hardwood flooring that it's going to be using. If I wanted to change that material or use something different, then I can click on this material paintbrush tool in the upper left-hand corner of my screen. This material paintbrush tool will again update the catalog panel to the right, and it'll show me all of the various finishes that I can apply. And by going over there, I can choose different materials for different rooms. So if I wanted to have perhaps carpet in one room, I can left click in that room and now there's carpeting in that room. It's changing those finishes that are there. So this is a handy view for illustrating the floor plan to someone that might not understand more of the 2D blueprint view that we have. By coming into this 2D designer's view, they can visualize the space a little bit better when it's related to finished materials. So I always like to take advantage of that 2D designer's view to illustrate out the materials as well. Another finish and thing that we also should be looking at is creating the ceilings inside the space as well. I'm going to be looking at the ceilings tool, and here in the ceilings tool, I have a number of different options on how to create the ceiling. Do I want to create the ceiling by room? So each room on my floor plan has its own unique ceiling. Or are they all just going to be the same material and they're all going to be flat? Then I can do the whole perimeter all at once, quick, boom, done. And it'll put one huge ceiling over the entire surface. For those of you that don't need to change the look of the ceiling room per room, that's a really valid, quick way of getting the whole ceiling in. Or ceiling by picking points, we'd use this particular tool, and I'll illustrate this. If I wanted to have part of the ceiling in one room be something totally different, we'll put a ceiling in, and then I'll show you how to use pick points to even further customize the look of the ceiling. So I'm going to use the ceiling by room tool. When I use the ceiling by room tool, again, this is where I like to use the 2D designer's view. And the only reason that I like to use the 2D designer's view for this type of insertion is that when I left click in a room, I want to be able to visualize that I have a ceiling in that room right away. Here in the 2D designer's view, very obvious, I just put a ceiling in that room. It covers up the floor, it's done, we can't see the flooring any longer. But now that I have those ceilings in, if I right click and tell it I'm finished, by returning back to the 2D blueprint view of our model, it's very hard to distinguish where the ceilings are. You can see them, and I'll zoom in on this nice and closely. It's the orange dashed line. That is the outline of your ceiling perimeter. So you can see it obviously matches into the inside face of our walls as well. So it is kind of difficult to see in this view. So that's why I always recommend when you're designing and laying things out in the software, always take advantage of all of these various alternative views that you see at the bottom of the screen. By quickly going to that 2D designer's view, I can see those materials, I can see those ceilings going in, and it's very apparent which rooms have that ceiling and which rooms don't, so I don't duplicate putting a ceiling into a particular room. Now that I have the ceilings in the space, I want to play around with their shapes. They're not going to be flat in all of the rooms, so I want to customize them. So I'm going to select on this ceiling in the upper left-hand corner to start with. I can look at it and I can select it and do all of my work in any of these alternative views. So even if I pop it into a 3D view, I'll be able to select on different things and edit them. So even while I'm here in a 2D designer's view, it doesn't stop me from editing and changing the model that I'm designing. So I've selected that ceiling. I right-click, because remembering, right-clicking is going to reveal our choices. And I want to look and review the properties that are associated to this particular ceiling. When the ceilings dialog box appears, it will show me the information about this ceiling. We want to focus today on the different types of ceilings. So instantly it'll go in as a flat ceiling, but we're going to change this particular ceiling to be a tray ceiling. So I just have to left click on the word tray, and now I have a tray ceiling and all of the properties underneath it. When I change it to a tray ceiling, I'm going to click OK right away because I want to illustrate something to you. When you put in a different style other than a flat ceiling, and I've changed it to a tray, notice the arrows that appear, and I'll zoom in on that nice and large for us on the big screen here using that zoom window tool. Each side of the ceiling now has an arrow. Just if you've used our roof tool, just like our roof tool. Those arrows hold information about the style of the ceiling on that particular side, because every side of the ceiling can have different properties. You can see that on the side where I have the green arrow, it's got a 1-foot skirt width. And then it goes up on a 45-degree angle to the new height of the tray at the top. What if on this particular side we didn't want it to have a skirt? We wanted it to be 0 right up against the wall. This will allow us to change that. I'm going to select all of the arrows because I want them to be uniform, and I want to make a change to all of them at the same time. So by left-clicking on the various red arrows, it turns them to green. Green means that they're selected and they're ready to be changed when I review their properties again. So I'm changing all 4 sides at the same time. I right-click, and again I look at the properties of the ceiling that now is a tray. Here I can see the tray height overall from the main height, which we had originally put in at 8 feet. The extra height that it's going to add on to that is a full foot. It's going to do that by sloping it in at a 45-degree angle. You could make that a 90-degree angle. If you wanted that to go straight up, it could be 90 degrees and it'd go all the way up straight. So there's nothing stopping you from changing that slope angle to any angle that you want it to be. Same with the skirt width. Right now it's got a full 1-foot skirt all around the edge, so it's going to go flat for a foot, and then it's going to start up on that 90-degree angle, going up for a foot, and then coming across at our new ceiling width. So that could be changed as well. You just come in here to any of these values, and you start changing their values. When I click OK, that changes all the different sides. If I want to see inside and look inside this room, up at that ceiling, that's when I would take advantage of this 3D tool, and I'm just going to circle around it here in our toolbar at the bottom there. This tool right here, this 3D tool, will allow us to add in and change any of these options. So I'm just going to click here, and I want to place a new camera. I want to place a camera in this room so I can see inside this room. It allows me to add as many cameras as I need. So my cursor, you can see, changes again. I've got a little camcorder attached to it. I want to stand here. So I left-click here. And then where do I want to look? I want to look to the opposite angle of the room. So I move my cursor in that direction, and I left-click again. With those 2 left clicks, it takes me inside my model from where I'm standing and where I'm looking. So now I can see that tray ceiling. I'm going to take advantage of the look around tool, and I'll circle around it right here. In the lower right-hand corner of our options, we have our look around tool. This tool lets me move around and look at what it's going to look like looking down and moving my head side to side within this room. What does it look like in this room with that tray ceiling? Is there anything that I'd like to change? Okay. I can select the ceiling in this type of view as well. Okay. The only difficulty that you have in selecting the ceiling in this view is if you want to change the sides, it's kind of difficult to see those arrows. So I can select those arrows, but it is kind of hard to see them. But I still can do it. It's just a little bit more work to see them. So if I wanted to make a change, I could select those arrows here, even in a 3D view, and look at their properties. Perhaps when I see it as a tray with that full 1 foot going up 30 degrees, maybe I want to change it to 90, and maybe I only want to go up 6 inches so that I can change that and see that coming over a foot, going up 6 inches, and a straight 90 if I prefer that look instead. Okay. If I pop it down back into our 2D designer's view, you can see I didn't choose the right-hand side. I left that one not picked because it was hard to select it. But I can right-click, look at its properties, and define those same changes here. So it doesn't matter what view you're in, you can always manipulate it. Okay. I'm going to zoom back out so we can see the entire model again. And then I'm going to select the ceiling below, and we can make that one into a cathedral or a vaulted ceiling as well. I'll show you how to do both of those options. So with this ceiling selected, I can right-click and look at its properties. Now I'm going to make it a cathedral. When I make it into a cathedral, again, it will add the 4 arrows. So I'm going to click OK, and you can see we have 4 arrows. And it instantly gives them all a straight surface up. So it almost looks like a hip roof. I'm going to select just 2 sides this time, the front and the back side, and I'm going to look at their properties. Now in here, again, if I wanted this to come up straight, I can say let's put these up at a 90-degree angle and click OK, and you can see now they're going up straight. Or I can take these 2 sides on either side of those, and with those 2 sides selected now, I can look at their properties and say, well, let's not make it a 45 going up, let's only make it a 15-degree, and click OK. And that's going to be a smaller slope. I can create a new camera view, place it in this room. This time I'm going to stand in the lower right-hand corner of the room, left-click, and look up to the upper corner, left-click. Now, something else that I want to point out to you when you're creating these various camera views, if you look at what is normally the catalog on the right-hand side of the screen, right now it's showing us the camera properties, and it's given it a generic name of Camera 2. I'm going to change this to be Living Room, so I know exactly where that camera is. So when I look down on my list, instead of having Camera 1 to Camera 2, Camera 1, I can change that to Dining Room. So I know exactly when I'm looking in this list of various cameras what they're all listed as and what their names are. So it's not confusing of what's Camera 1, was I standing in the kitchen when I did Camera 1, or was I in a different room? Very distinctly give them a name so you know where you are. Okay, so looking back in our living room view, we can see our cathedral ceiling that we've created. So you have all of these opportunities to create all of these custom shapes. I'm going to put it back into a 2D view. When I'm in a 2D view now, I'm going to go back to 2D Designer so I can easily select that ceiling again. I'm going to pick the lower right-hand corner. Again, I'm going to look at its properties. What if we wanted it just to vault in one direction? I'm going to select Cathedral for that option and click OK. I'm going to select these 3 arrows. What we're wanting to happen with this particular ceiling is we're wanting it to be one slope going up in this direction. So if we were looking at a kind of a section view of the room itself, the ceiling is going to do this. This is what we want to happen, this angle up with the ceiling. So we're going to select these 3 arrows that are part of the ceiling and tell them just to rake themselves upwards. To do that, I just look at their properties, and under the properties of the ceiling, right now we've got it set to straight. I'm going to set them all to gable. And all it does when it makes it a gable is it tries to make it a gable end. But if I have gable beside a gable, like we do here, this side and this side both being gables, it'll automatically rake it up to the same surface plane. So I'm going to click OK, and we get one surface. So if I go to a general 3D view, I'll pick on this 3D quick view button down here at the bottom of the screen and look at our model from the lower right. We can see the ceiling going up on that 45-degree angle. So I can select it, pick that one green arrow at the very beginning there, look at its properties, and tell it instead of being a 45-degree, let's just make that maybe a 5-degree slope, so it's much smaller. Again, any property that you want. Keep going back, changing them, take a look at your design, switch them around, and you can have all of those different values put in. Okay, so all different types of ceilings can be made just by selecting the ceiling, right-click, and taking a look at their properties. Okay, I'm going to put it back into this 2D Designer's view because I wanted to look at this ceiling, one last look at ceilings, and take a look at this one and see how we can even customize it even further. I'm going to select the ceiling, right-click, and when I right-click, we have the option to cut an opening. What if I had a tray inside of a tray? Right now, our tray command allows me to do one tray, but what if it steps up and then it steps up again? Well, before that, I can cut an opening. So I'm going to cut an opening along the edge of the ceiling that's already there. So I'm just left-clicking in all of those corners, and you can see that green line forming. This is going to be the outline of the hole that I'm cutting. Okay. Now that hole, right-click, I'm just going to hit cancel there for a second. That hole can be from any point. So if I wanted to sketch out a point here, if I can type in dimensions, so I can say I want to go over exactly 7 feet. I want to come down exactly 7 feet, and it's just a 7-foot by 7-foot square hole in the middle there. I can type in the distances too. I don't have to pick from points. Then I right-click and I tell it I'm finished. Now in our 2D Designer's view, boom, I can see the floor again. I don't have a ceiling in this area. It sees a hole. And if I go back to our dining room view, there's a hole I can see right outside. Okay. From there, what I can do is I can pick points to form a ceiling in here. So I'm going to pick on our ceiling tool again, ceiling by picking points. And by ceiling by picking points, now I can pick those corners of our ceiling and see how it's nicely snapping to it. I'm waiting for that circle with an X. It's filling in that new ceiling right there. Pick those 4 corners, right-click, tell it I'm finished. This ceiling, when it goes in, it's going to go at the same height as our original ceiling in. So it's going to be at 8 feet. So if I pop that into a 3D view right now, you can see it sitting low. So I'm going to select it, right-click, look at its properties. And I'm going to make it a tray again. And we'll give it the 1-foot difference, 45, and see how it's popped up there and making that. To get it to sit up even higher, so it's at our 8'6" height because we told it to go up 6 inches, I'm going to right-click and elevate this entire ceiling up to 8'6". Hit apply. And OK, and we can see the ceiling popped up. So this allows us to do a tray inside of a tray. So if you have a really complicated ceiling, put the ceiling in, cut a hole around the part that's going to change, put in a ceiling by picking points to accommodate that difference in ceiling within a ceiling. Okay. I'm going to put this back into a 2D view. File and save my work. Again, I always recommend saving at different intervals. I have all of my ceilings in, so now I can save my work again. I'm going to put this into a 3D view. Again, I'm going to place a camera, and I'm going to stand at the dining room looking towards this room right here. Get a good look at that cloverleaf window that we put in. Using this walk tool, it allows me to walk around the room to kind of understand the space. And now what I want to do is I want to start incorporating some interior objects. And then once I have them in, I'll show you how you can put in your own custom finishes as well and materials that you can use. So I'm going to click on the Interiors tab. And in the Interiors tab, I'm going to click on Furniture. And I'm just going to roughly place some furniture for the interior designers in the crowd. Don't get too excited if I just slop this furniture inside the room and not in any particular type of order. I'm just going to place them inside the room. Now that I have the furniture there, I'm just going to grab a rug and place it inside this space as well. You can see that when I have the rug attached to my cursor, it doesn't want to move it and place it where I want it to go. It sees it as colliding with the other objects. So down in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, I'm just going to turn off collision, and then I can freely place that wherever I'd like it to go. So I'm just going to move it in here. So we've got the legs of the chairs and the legs of that sofa all sitting nicely on that rug. But the rug, not really happy with the rug in this space. I want to use a different material on it. Let me just walk a little closer to it so we can see it a little bit better. Let's use a different material there. I have a photograph of a rug perhaps from a manufacturer, or that I've taken and I want to see what it looks like in this space. So I'm going to go up and click on the Material Paintbrush tool. And that tool will, again, bring up all of our various materials that we have in the catalog, like we used to insert the rug in that 2D designer's view. Same tool can be used here in a 3D view as well. And I'm going to look at our various carpet options that we have. And looking at the various carpet options that we have, there's nothing in here that excites me that I'd like to use. So I want to add in a picture, a photograph of a carpet that was given to me by a manufacturer. So I'm going to right-click here in the catalog underneath my materials to say that I want to add a new material. And when you're adding new materials in, take advantage of all these folder groups that we've listed here to make sure that you're organizing them. So I'm in carpets, I'm adding a new material for a carpet. So I'll choose Add Material. The Materials Property dialog pops up, and it wants me to give my new rug a name, my new rug material. It's going to use the defaults that were there on the one that I had selected, so I'm just going to say New Carpet. Again, generic, but you're going to be very specific when you click yours. When you're bringing in a new material, that material could either be a solid color, so I could select out and say, you know, it's just a robin eggs blue piece of carpeting, just that material, and that's the material I want to bring in. Or you can use a texture. And a texture is either a JPEG or a Targa picture of an actual material. So I'm going to use that option, and I'm going to click on the Select button. That will take me out to my hard drive where I can look for different materials. So here I'm looking, and I've found my rug texture. And you can see bitmap, JPEG, PNGs, GIFs, and TIFFs. I highly recommend using JPEGs. They're smaller file sizes, so your overall size of your model won't become so huge if you're using something like a bitmap. So I'm going to use this rug texture. There's my nice texture. I can see it. It looks great, and I've given it a name. Now, we're going to be proceeding after this looking at rendering properties and how to create a great rendering. So another thing I want to point out is when you're bringing in new materials, down at the very bottom of the dialog box, you can also associate to these materials rendering options. So for this particular piece of rug, do I want to make it specular? Do I want to make it shiny? Does it have any kind of shiny tone? Is there any kind of sheen to it that I want it to have? I'm going to leave that it's a dull finish. But if this was something like a quartz countertop or something that you would want to have a sheen to it, the hardwood flooring material, you would want to give that a specular edge. And we'll look at these properties too when we talk about the rendering portion. Emissive means does it emit light? So if this was a material that I was going to be using on a lampshade, I could give it a nice emissive quality so it looks like that lamp is glowing and it's turned on. Or is this transparent in any degree? And then I could change it up to 100% if this was a style of glass that I was bringing in as well. So every material that you're going to be bringing in, you can have custom rendering effects that it will use when it creates the rendering to give it that nice photorealistic appearance. So if it is something that is going to be shiny, specular, give it a specular value. If it's something that's going to emit light, like a lampshade material, give it emissive value, or transparency if it's going to be see-through. Our rug is not shiny, it's not emissive, and it's not transparent, so I'm going to leave those all at 0, and I'm going to click OK. Now in our catalog, we have our rug material. So I'm just going to, using my material paintbrush, left-click on this piece of carpeting. And it says, hey, this is a new carpet material. Did you intend it for interior accessories? And I'm going to say, yes, I absolutely did. And there's my rug on top of that rug that was already there. Now, another popular question, and I'm going to revert back to the original rug material that was there. So I'm going to go back to my material catalog, go to the different carpets there, and pick a rug that has a distinctive pattern like this one. Yes, that fits inside the parameters of this rug. but I'm going to double click on this rug. I want to make this rug much bigger. So I'm going to make this rug, the width of it is going to be 5 feet, and the length of it is going to be 8 feet. Now, look what it did to the picture of that rug. What you're doing when you're bringing in a material is you're giving it a very distinct size. So when it goes to stretch it out after you've applied it to something, it's just going to repeat that pattern over and over again. So you can see it has the original size, and then to make it bigger, 5 foot by 8 foot, it just repeats that pattern to the side and up and down. So how can we make this piece of rug look like it's meant to be 5 foot by 8 foot? That's where I'm going to take you to this Appearance tab. And under the Appearance tab for this rug, you'll see there is a Mapping button. That's where we're going to map this particular material onto this rug so it's the right size. So I'm going to click on that Mapping button. And when I click on the Mapping button, it brings up the size that this rug was. So I'm going to say that the height of it is, I believe I made it 8 foot, and the width of it is 5 foot. I'm overriding the original size of the tile so that I can stretch it out so it fits on the rug size that I want to use. So I've made it 8 foot by 5 foot, and now you can see in the image itself, it looks great. Sometimes you'll bring them in, and you might have to use these positioning arrows. So see how as I push it to one side, if I wanted it to have a repeating pattern maybe in the middle, I can keep hitting on that arrow to move it so that it's in the right position for being 5 foot by 8 foot. So you can take advantage and kind of play with it to make sure that it's sitting in the exact spot where you wanted it for that 5 foot by 8 foot. Okay, so I click OK, and now it's got the right material mapped correctly for that size of rug. Okay, so again, that's using this material paintbrush tool right here. It'll show you all of your various materials. You can go through all of the selections that you see there, left click to select and place it on your element, or if you don't see something in the materials, right click and add a new material as well. So now we have completed creating just a small, rough little model. And now what we want to do is we want to make this a photographic image that we can send off to a client. So we want to make this a high-end rendering. When we're using the software and we're in this design mode, it's giving you more of a cartoony look because it's quick and easy to walk around in this type of image. When we're ready to send off the view to a client, that's when we create a photorealistic rendering. And what that does is it'll cast down shades and shadows for particular lights that we have in a scene. And it will also give the materials that we've brought in those rendering values that we saw when we were creating that new rug. It'll make them look specular. It will make them look emissive if they are. I'm just going to throw in a few lights in our space so that when we do the rendering, it's not going to be very dark. And so I can also explain the different elements that make up a really good rendering. When we look at rendering a space so that we can create an image that we can send off to a client, there's 3 things that we have to take into consideration. One is the materials that we've used in the space and all of their values behind them, their rendering values. 2, the lighting that's in the space. Because if there's too much lighting in a room or too little lighting in a room, it really will hamper the overall look of the rendering as well, and the shades and shadows that it's casting down, and also the rendering settings that you use when you go to create the photorealistic rendering. So we're going to be looking at those 3 different aspects. So the first thing we're going to look at is the materials themselves. So I'm going to click on my material paintbrush here, and I'm going to use this little eyedropper tool here. I want to take a sample of the floor material that we're using right now. So I'm going to put that eyedropper on the floor. And what it does is it looks in my materials to show me the exact material that it's using. and it's showing me that it's using hand-scraped hardwood. So I'm going to double-click on that hand-scraped hardwood in my catalog to bring up its properties. It brings up the properties just like the rug material properties dialog box that we were in earlier. But what I want to look at are the settings for this particular material. So I'm going to check here for display settings and details here, because I very specifically want to look at this material and how it's being used. So I want to turn it to be a little bit specular. I want to be about 8% glossy. When you're looking and creating a room, there's always a tendency to want to make everything look shiny and new in a rendering. Everybody turns up the specular, oh, let's make that 28% or 60% specular so it looks really glossy. I would never in our software go above 15%. If you go above 15%, it really gives it a watery look, and it doesn't look as photorealistic. I would stay below 15%. And if you have one element in your room that you want to be the focal point and you want it to be highly specular, highly glossy, make one element that 15%. Make all other elements something lower than that. Because if everything is nice and glossy and everything is shiny, then they're all shiny and they're all reflective off of each other, and it really gives it a really fake, watery look. So choose one element to make it your 15%, but everything other than that should be somewhat lower than that. So I'm going to lower this down to about 8%. Again, emissive means, is it emitting light? So if I was putting a lampshade in here, I might want to make that emissive so that it gives it that glow, that fake look of the light. Transparency would be any of our glasses to make sure that you can see through them. I don't want to see through the hardwood floor. I don't want it to glow, but I do want it to be shiny. So I'll give it about an 8% specular. Okay. I'm going to, as an exercise as well, put in another type of light here. I'm going to put in a hanging light where I'll make it emissive so you can see how to do that. So let me put in a island light here. Let's ceiling lights, pendant. There's a particular pendant that I want to use. And this one right here. I've seen this used in a number of different renderings, and I want to kind of walk up and closer to it. See this particular light? When this light is used, it's going to cast out light from it because it's a light, and we'll look at those light properties later. But when it does that, because it has this metal portion wrapped around it in a grid, that grid is going to cast out as well a reflection of that. So your walls will all of a sudden have this grid pattern on it. So instead of having this light emit light, I'm going to select this light and show you the properties behind the light itself and how they can be used and how we can turn them off as well. So for this particular light, I'm going to go to the Lights tab. And you can see the light's been shut down. The eye is closed. That means even though this light is in the scene, it's not going to cast any light. If I turn that light on, it will cast light, and it'll use the properties that it has below it. I'm just turning this light up so you can see that red dot. See that red dot in the middle? That defines where this light fixture is starting and where actually like the light bulb portion of this light would be. So it's right in the middle of that light fixture. So it's going to glow out from the middle. And when it glows out of the middle, like I said, it's going to go past all of that wiring that's around it, that wire mesh kind of look. If I wanted to, I could simply say that I want this to hang, 4 inches below the light itself, and then that light, that little red dot, goes below it. Can you see that going below it now? So it can actually cast itself away from the light, so it's not going to go through there. So that's one way of still having it cast out light, but not from inside the unit itself, so it's coming out under that grid pattern. Another way for it to cast light is to turn off that light itself. And then I'm going to go to the Appearance page and go to the Shade component of this light. The shade component, this gray part all the way around it, is an actual material. So if I look at that material, I want to edit and look at its properties. We can give it an emissive value, like 15%. So it gives the illusion that this light is turned on and it's casting out light from inside it. It's actually the shade that's got an emissive value to it, but it's not going to create that triangular look to it from all that mesh that's coming from it, wrapped around it. You're not going to see that pattern reflected out on your ceilings. So that's one way of having the illusion of a light turned on, but actually having it turned off in the scene. Every light that's in our catalog can have a light source set to it. This one's a 40-degree watt bulb. If you want it to be, if you're finding that the lighting when you're doing a rendering is too dull, you want it to be a brighter light, you can edit the light itself and pick from a variety of different wattages of bulbs to see how they're actually going to cast out their light and make it brighter. Where the light is casting down. So when I'm looking at this light, we know that the light itself is inside the light and it's hanging right in here. But when it's casting down the light, is that light coming up or is that light coming down? It's all depending on the type of light that's being used. This is a pendant mount light, so the pendant mounts come up and down. Different types of lights will only shed the light downwards. When it's shedding itself downwards, these light orientation that you see here can allow you to be even more specific about the light and where it's being cast. You can give it a tilt. So I can say tilt that 45 degrees so that when the light is coming down, it's coming off on a 45-degree angle for the up and down. And if I wanted it to come back or forth, I can change that left to right angle as well. So maybe it's coming out to one side, not directly down. So you've got a lot of variance there to play with on where the light is coming from and where it is being cast down into the space. You can even turn off the lights. Sometimes you want to show a light fixture in a scene to show the actual fixture that you're going to be specifying, but you don't want to turn it on because it'd be too bright with all the other lights that are on the space, and that's when you take advantage of turning off that particular light. So every object, every lighting object has this lighting page where you can specify the wattage of light being used, if the light is being turned on or not, where the light bulb is actually housed in the unit. You can strategically put it a little bit lower. I often put them a little bit lower for a hanging light on a ceiling, so it's not too close to the ceiling and it's going to create that burn mark on the ceiling. Lower that value down a little bit. And if you want to direct the light in any way, you can use these light orientation options here to tilt the light in a different direction. So that'll affect the lighting. So I've got all of these different lights in my space that are going to give me light in the space. And all of the materials in this space have their own values as well. Are they emissive? Are they reflective? Or are they transparent? Now inside the space, to tie that all together so how these lights work with the materials, that's when we create a rendering, a 3D real view. So I'm going to click on this Render 3D Real View option, and that takes us into our Render 3D dialog box. In here, if you're not happy with the view that it's giving you, you can always use the orientation tools and pick where you're actually standing and looking, so that part of the scene. What's most important in this dialog box is down in the lower left-hand corner, the options that you have available for creating this rendering. So I'm going to click on that options button. When it's creating this photorealistic rendering, you also have to think about the sunlight coming in through those windows, how they're going to cast down shades and shadows. So here in this dialog box in the upper left-hand corner, we have global settings. You can tell it where you are in the world, what date it is. Today's July the 29th in 2015, and what time it is as well. So I can play with this time. I'm going to say, don't use the current time and date. Let's make this maybe 10 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening to see where the lights are at that time of day. So if you wanted to show a client sitting in your back family room area. Maybe there's a lot of worry about sun. In the evening, coming in through those windows, you can do a rendering and show them the effects of where you are in the world and what time of day it is. All different countries are in here, all different major cities. But if you don't see your city in here, you can just find the longitude and latitude of where you are and put in those values and give it a name, and it will add itself to the list, so you can be very specific about where you are. That will cast the shades and shadows coming in from the window. Now, looking at our 3D settings, you can see that there's 5 different levels of photorealistic rendering. Level 1 is the lowest, so it's only going to simulate a little bit of light coming from our lights and those reflections. But going all the way up to level 5, where it's the highest, it's going to cast down more of a realistic light from all of the different light sources and play off of that for the reflection off of the different materials. It's the highest level of rendering. It's going to look the most photorealistic, but you can see in brackets, it's also the slowest. It's going to take its time because it's got more rays of light to consider from every single fixture. So it's going to take it a little longer. What we do in-house to create the photorealistic renderings that you see up on our gallery on our website is we always start off by doing a low-level rendering. We want to do a low-level rendering just to make sure that we're happy with all the materials, how they're taking on their material properties, if there's any shades or shadows that are appearing in the scene that we really don't like, we might have to move some further. You'll see anti-aliasing, which is a horrible computer term. If you look out onto my scene and look in particular along the edge of the ceiling and the walls, see how it looks a little jagged? It's not a nice, clean line. You'll see the same at the bottom of the trim going onto the floor. It's got a jagged edge to it. Every video card has a degree of difficulty of creating a straight line in a 3D view. So what anti-aliasing does is it helps to straighten out that line, give it a nice straight appearance. Okay, when you're doing your final renderings, obviously you'd want those up at the highest level. This does add a time factor to it as well. So if you're in a rush and just doing kind of a preliminary view, then you could keep that down at 1, just knowing you can have a little bit of a jagged edge to them. Down in the environment, it looks, do you want to turn all the lights on? So this is an overall shut down all those lights in the scene or turn them on. So I'm going to say turn on those lights. Underneath that, you'll see ignore IES light settings, which is much brackets faster. Every light that's in the space has lighting qualities associated to them as well that's in the background. So when we chose that 40-watt incandescent bulb, we're taking IES settings from them. So if any of your lighting manufacturers, like GE as an example, creates these IES files, so they can show you in these IES files the exact illumination of that particular light. That's a large calculation to go to, so again, it takes a lot longer to look at all of those lighting, different light fixtures you have in a space, review the IES light settings, and apply them to the scene. It's going to take a little bit longer to do that. So we're going to ignore them for today's class. You won't see a dramatic change in the overall light quality. You'll still have the lights in the scene. It's just not going to be that exact IES setting. So if you're worried about having that IES setting so you know exactly how that 40-watt bulb looks, make sure you don't ignore it. But for a good quality rendering, you can still skip over it. You can turn daylight on or off. I don't have to have the shades and shadows of the sunlight coming in and filtering in through the windows. I could just shut them off, but if I do turn them on, I could tell it even that it's clear sky, partly cloudy or overcast, so it does give the correct light coming in through the window. So we'll say it's a nice clear sky like it is today. Where I'm located, I'm sure the weather will be different for all of you all around the world. Noise reduction. Noise reduction deals with when I have light coming in and streaming through the windows. That's one type of lighting from our sunlight. And then I have our electrical lights in the space, those pot lights that I put in. When those two lights converge and they meet each other, there could be what we call noise. So it could give it kind of a particle look. So you can put this number up to reduce it as much as you can. So when you're doing your first levels of rendering, those low levels, you'll see that speculation occur. And I'm going to keep this actually down to 1 so I can show you that speculation. And the higher the number you put in here, the more it's going to work to reduce that noise. Okay. We don't have any, this isn't an exterior shot, but if I did have trees or billboards, billboards could be maybe a picture of the people that you're putting in, making it look like a person's in the scene as a billboard. How intense do you want them to be in the scene? The default setting is 70%, and we find that works the best to make them look like they're realistic and in the scene. The background that's being used for outside, so if I move this dialog box a little bit and we look out that cloverleaf window, we can see it's just a blue sky bitmap that we've used. We could convert that to use just a background color. So if I say don't use the image, it'll just use that gray color. But I want it to use that blue sky. And there's two different ways it can use that blue sky setting. It can say, I'm going to use it as a static background, meaning when I go to create the photorealistic image, it's going to take out the background and it's going to do all of its calculations of where the sun is and do all the lighting. And at the very end, it's going to put it back in again. So it's not going to be affected by the sunlight or any of the other lights in the space. If I wanted it to be affected, I could use a scale dynamic background and put it up at like 100% or whatever percentage you want. I would always use scale dynamic background if I'm using an exterior rendering or creating an exterior rendering, and I want it to incorporate some of the trees that we have in the encyclopedia within the program, because those are all billboards. You want it to scale all of those items, and the background behind, you just don't want it to kludge it behind, or else it will look like they're outlined. So if you're using trees, the trees that come with the software, use the scale dynamic background. Otherwise, you can use a static background. Since I have an interior shot and there's not much of the background showing, it wouldn't really matter either way, but I'll use this static background. I'll use apply and OK. When I click on the Start Rendering button, it's going to go through a calculation of, first of all, the lighting in the space. So as it's going through and creating that image, it's going to just give you a faint image, and it's kind of going to give a pixelized look as it creates it. And then as it does that, it looks at all those lights that are in the space. And you'll see them start to turn on in the space so that it can create that look of the light. Once it has the global illumination in the space, creating all of those lights, then it starts to look at all of the materials and how those materials are going to be affected by the light that's in the space. So it's going to just start to slowly reveal itself, more of a speculated look, and then it's going to keep doing all of these passes of all of the different lights that are there. And then it's going to look at the materials, how they're going to reflect the light in the space. And then it's going to take a look at all of the lights that are in the space. And it's going to go through a ray tracing process. So the first process is called radiosity, where it's doing that global illumination. And then what ray tracing does is it takes the image and it passes it through a process to make it look more smooth with the lights that are in the space, so they work together properly. Again, depending on the speed of your computer, and the level of rendering that you chose. So I chose a moderate level, so it'll be quicker, but I also have to remember that right now I'm streaming this out through GoToMeeting, so it's going to slow my computer down. So what might have taken perhaps 2 minutes on a moderate to low level rendering, it's probably going to double that because I'm using GoToMeeting, so it's probably going to take us 5 minutes to create this photorealistic image. When you do a high level rendering or any type of rendering, what you also have to remember is the size of your project. So right now I'm working on a 1-story, it's probably 900 square feet. So that'll take obviously much faster than if I was doing a 10,000 square foot home with multiple levels. Even though I'm just working in this one room and looking at this one space, it does take a look at the entire model, because there could be something that's behind me that could cast a shade or shadow into this space, or there could be an opening in that wall looking into another room, and I would need to think of the lighting in that room, the materials in that room. So when you have larger projects, just know that it's going to take it longer to complete them because it has to think of all of the different elements in all the different spaces. One hint that I can give you to decrease the time to create a photorealistic rendering is to save a copy of your model. So you save your model and then do a file save as. Give it a different name. And in that copy of your model, delete out anything extra elements that are not going to be in your scene. So if there's an entire second floor, rip it off. If there's objects in a kitchen, you've got all the cabinets, the furniture, everything, get rid of them, delete them. So we're only looking at this space at this moment, and maybe we'll reduce it to be about 90 square feet, much quicker to render than 10,000 square feet. So that saving a copy of your model would be a big time saver for you as well. And just keep saving copies of it to create all the different renderings so that it speeds up your time to produce all of these elements. Our next step after creating this photorealistic rendering is we're going to be looking at animations. And when we look at animations, those can take a lot of time as well because it looks at every step that you take and it ray traces it. So that's not something, if you want a photorealistic animation that you can expect in minutes, that's something that you can expect in hours. So start the animation process at night, go home, come back the next day to the office, and you'll have a nice animation created. It's certainly not something that can be created in a matter of minutes unless you don't ray trace it. So I'm down to the last 10 seconds of remaining time for this rendering. And once it's completed, I'll show you a couple things that we can do with it. So down to the last 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of this rendering. Once it's complete, it also gives you the opportunity to play with it. So looking at this completed rendering on my screen right now, do you see the little in the corners here? Maybe I'll draw a pen around it. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about speculation there, so that when you wanted to take away from that, reduce that noise, that's what it's going to reduce, is all that noise coming through. You can really see it on the back wall because it's dealing with these two lights and the light coming in from the window. So the more you increase that value for noise, the better that's going to appear. If you find that the image itself is too light, you have this brightness. I'm just going to hit on the upper arrow of this brightness, and you can see that it's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. So you can increase think of it like a flash on a camera. We're just increasing the brightness that's available in this scene and making it look brighter, or we can also hit the down arrow and make it look darker if it's way too bright as well. Burn, if there's any burn, we can take away or reduce the burn values as well. Once we're happy with the overall image and its look, that's when I'd say let's apply a static background, and then you can see out the window we can see my blue sky appear. Okay. We can also click on convert this to a grayscale, so if you want to give it a black and white image, you can do that. This is a strategy that I would use if you're working with a set of homeowners that are going to get stuck and really can't see past the materials that you might have chosen for the scene. They can't get past that tan color you put on the wall, therefore they hate the whole design. But if you showed it to them in a black and white, kind of a grayscale concept drawing so that they can see the space, the placement of the furniture, how the light's coming into the space, but not hung up on colors, maybe this might be a better view for those clients. So you can convert it to a grayscale if you don't want them to get too worried about the overall materials that you've chosen for them. When you save the rendering, you're saving it as either a JPEG or a bitmap. And if you save it as a JPEG, that means your intention is to use it maybe on a website or to email it out. If you save it as a bitmap, those are better for print materials. So you might want to put it into a book, or maybe you're sending it off for a local magazine or a newspaper to use. That's when you would use a bitmap. So hit save, and then you're done with the rendering. And then I'm just going to hit close here to finish off that rendering. Okay, a lot of settings to go into rendering, but if you take the time to think about the lighting in the space, the materials that you're using, and those various settings that I went over with you today, you'll be able to produce some really high-end renderings. Before we get into the question and answers, we're time of our webinar, we're on to our last subject here. I'm just going to talk about animations. So if you're thinking about questions that I might have evoked going through this webinar, start typing them out now because we are on the last portion of our webinar, and I'm going to look at talking about animations. So to start the animation, I'm going to put it down into a 2D view, because when we're creating an animation, we're putting out a path that we want it to follow. To create an animation, you go up to the Tools pull-down menu, and then you will see Animation. And what the first step is to create a path. Draw out in a 2D view the path that you want to walk around in this animation. So insert a path. So I'll just call this webinar path for today. When we're creating this path and we're walking along this path, there's two ways that we can walk along this path and look. First of all, our eyes can follow the path. So as I'm walking, follow the same path with my eyes. And the other option that you have is, as I'm walking and following that path, I always want to be looking at a very specific target. So maybe this would be best for exterior views, specify target. I'm walking and following a path past the house, but I'm always looking at the house. So I'm looking at it as I approach, I'm looking at it as I'm right up against the house, and as I pass and go by the house, I'm going to look back and still look at the house so I can see it from different angles. But when you're doing an interior animation, you'll probably want to follow the path and look as you walk. Okay, I'm going to click OK, and then I'm just pointing out now where I'm walking. So I'm going to left click here at the front door. That's my first step, and then I'm going to come into the backspace, and then I'm going to turn and come over here and look at the couches and chairs. Every time you click and left click, it creates these little blue squares. Those are control points. Every time it comes to a control point, it has to stop and think and what's changed and go on. So the more control points that you have in an animation, the longer it's going to take it to create the animation. But put in as many control points as you need. I needed to turn that corner. I need a control point there to say I'm now going in a different direction. You'll also need one if you want to change the height. So as I go up the stairs, I need a control point. Maybe every stair would be a little bit jerky in your animation, but maybe up a couple stairs and then up to the very top, you can change the height at these control points as well. Okay, so you can see where I'm starting. There's my camera point. I'm walking along that path until I'm finished the animation. Once I'm done pointing out those points, I right-click and I tell it that I'm finished. There's my animation path. Back up to Tools, choose Animation, and here I can add more control points as well. And those control points can be an elevate control point or just a control point. You can add different sounds at control points as well. So as I walk in the door, I could add a sound node there. And that sound node could be any kind of wave file that you want to produce. So it could be you talking about the home, how much work and options that are available, your superior construction detail you put into your homes, or it could be just even nice music, or it could be a sound as I go through the door or walk on the floor, it creaks, and different sounds. So any kind of control point there you want to add. So I'm going to hit Create Animation, and it takes me into this preview just the same as it did for creating that photorealistic rendering. At the very top here we get a preview, so I can hit on the play button and it shows me the animation that it's created. So you can see with only having 2 control points how quickly it turns that corner and it creates that animation. So you'll want to make sure that you can slow that process down. When I hit save here, it's going to start to create that animation, but we want to look at that animation properties first. When I look at the animation properties, I'm going to go to the top of that dialog box and go to the animation settings. You can see here that I can ray trace the animation. That means add in that sunlight, so it's going to cast down shades and shadows and take advantage of all the different material properties. Again, that's going to add some time. When you're creating animations, AVI files, they're going to be huge, huge files. So you can compress it, and when you compress it, it's going to make it a smaller file size so that you can put that up onto your website. When you compress it, you just have to make sure that you share that compressing technology with your website or whatever you're going to use so that it's using the same encoder, because it encodes it when it compresses it. The frame rate, the speed rate that you're going to go frame to frame to frame to frame. If you need to slow it down, you can do that here or speed it up. You can give it a file name where it's going to save and also its size when it's done. So depending on where you're going to publish this, you might want to put it at a different size. Okay, so that's going to be very quick. You can see you can have the same global settings, the 3D real view settings, so that it's using the same values when it's ray tracing that animation. And then you would hit save and it would create that path. I'm not going to create the rendering at this time because, again, it has to, for every step it takes, create a photorealistic image. So there's going to be probably 50 different slides here that it's going to have to go through on ray trace. So it's going to take some time. So that is something, ray tracing, that you're going to want to leave till the end of the day, go home, come back, and you'll have your animation created. We've covered a lot of information today. So let me do a recap while you're typing up your questions. First of all, in the design of the building, we started talking about walls and how there was many different ways to create the walls that are in our project. We used walls by baseline for exterior. We talked about waiting for the object snap at each corner. We talked about using the enter insertion offset option so that we can start a wall a specific point away from a corner. And we also talked about duplicating walls to create a wall right side by side another one that already exists. We then inserted doors and talked about doing the same thing, centering the doors and offsetting them from a corner. Same with the windows and the openings. And we also brought in that custom window and talked about how you can bring in any kind of DWG, 3DS, or SketchUp file as different blocks. We used windows for our example day, but that could have been a door, that could be a couch, that could be a chair, that could be a cabinet, any kind of block, 3D block that you want to bring in, you can incorporate it into your design as well. We then took a look at ceilings, and we created 3 different types of ceilings in our design and looked at the properties of ceilings and understanding the different elements that are there and the different properties that are behind the ceiling so we can create fully customizable ceilings. And then we talked about materials. We went inside the home into our living room, the front back room here, camera 1, and we brought in that custom rug material. And we talked about the material properties as well, that every material that we bring in can have an emissive quality to it. Does it emit light? It can have a transparency value to it, and it also can have a glossiness value to it as well, so that when we create those photorealistic renderings, we're creating them really producing what that material is going to look like, so that it can cast the shades and shadows it needs to, or the reflections if it's a glossy material. we took all of that knowledge and to start talking about creating photorealistic renderings and all of the properties that are there and the settings that you can choose when creating a rendering, and also how it looks at the lighting that's in the space and all the lighting values that are in each light bulb that are in your catalog, and also the materials that are being used with it. Once we produced that rendering, we then spoke briefly about animations, creating the path, and that animations follow the same rules as our renderings, and you can set those different values to it. Lots of material covered, and just under 2 hours, and we're going to leave this last 15 minutes of the class for your questions and answers that you might have about designing or creating renderings in the software. So let's go now over to our questions panel, and I'll pop in with the one that was just posted. When bringing in a SketchUp file, what EYS do you recommend keeping on, and what ones don't you really need to bring in? So when you're bringing in something like a SketchUp file, like this window, when this window is brought in, it has all of these different components displayed with it. And you can see that with the 2D view, I turned everything off except the slice that we took in. But the 3D view, we bring all of them in, all of the different views that you've brought in, and just by turning them off, you can see the different elements. You can see them start to slowly disappear here of what you need to bring in. So we bring them all in, and then you have this component display option on import where you can turn them on and off. So you don't have to turn anything on or off out in SketchUp before you save it and bring it in. And the one thing I do recommend, though, for bringing in SketchUp files, when you're bringing in a SketchUp file, sometimes they've drawn multiple components in the same file. So this window, there might be a person standing beside it. If that person is a separate component, hopefully we can turn them off. Otherwise, if you do have SketchUp, you're going to have to go in there and get rid of the person that's standing beside of the window, because it's going to affect how that SketchUp file is going to look in your display. Okay. That is our only question that's being typed up there. I mean, we have 15 minutes for questions and answers. This is by far the most valuable part of our webinar time together, is answering specific questions that you might have. Never, ever hesitate to ask a question. Every question really, truly is a great question. For some of you that might have been sitting through there, and it's a lot of information to take in, even those simple questions of, hey, can you cover doing that again? No worries, no problem. I don't hesitate to do that again. So any questions you might have, make sure you do ask them at this time, because if there isn't any further questions, I won't hold everybody here. We'll leave this chat panel open for one further minute. So if you do have any questions, you can have the opportunity to ask them. While we're waiting for questions, I will take you up to our website, www.cadsoft.com, and I take you up to our Client Center, where we do have different classes listed. Today's class is this online design and rendering webinar. So for those of you that upgraded to version 11, you got a complimentary pass to it. For those of you that might be on an older version and didn't upgrade, you can purchase these renderings, these webinars as well. But for those of you that did upgrade and got the pass in today, you get a pass in for next month as well. On August the 12th, we're doing developing a set of working drawings. And the email that we sent you that showed you where to get your upgrade and downloaded it also had registration for these classes there as well. So make sure you register for all of them. And the other class that we have is on August the 26th, Material Takeoff and Framing webinar. So make sure you sign up for all of those 2-hour classes and take advantage of that opportunity. Will this webinar be available online? Yes, it will. I'm going to be putting this webinar up into our archive, where you'll find all of our archived Tuesday classes. These ones will also be put up in there for your enjoyment as well. So I will put those up there so that you can review them. These 3 classes normally with these online classes that have a purchase of, to get into them, we don't normally put them up. We set them to a separate portion of our website that's got a private client portal, so only those that attended the webinar can see it. But since these ones were open to the people that upgraded to version 11, we're going to put them in our archive webinar where we put all of our other archives as well. So yes, you can watch it again. Oh, and there's another question. So in 2D, you turned everything off. Yes, when I'm bringing in a SketchUp file and I look at their display here, in 2D, I turn absolutely everything off. The only thing I wanted to see in 2D is the slice that I took. So it's a nice, clean representation of that window. If I left all of these on, you can see just how much information is relayed there. Not really meaningful. So I just took a slice, so it's a better looking 2D. Okay, so one further minute for any questions, and then we will end off the webinar. And again, make sure you do register for all of the upcoming webinars that we're offering as well. We have our regular Tuesday 2 o'clock. So if you've never attended those before, every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we do have a complimentary webinar for all of our clients on the current version. You'll find those here under webinars. They're just a 1 hour class. We do a half-hour lesson and then leave a half an hour for question and answer. So it's just a little glimpse at each of these individual topics, but great opportunity to learn. So coming up next week, we're talking about the modification tools and worksheet. Then we're going to talk about schedules and importing and exporting. So lots of great topics, great opportunities to learn. So make sure you register for these. These are all complimentary, and we do put these all up in our archive as well. So that looks like all of the questions for today's class. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the class. I hope you enjoy your week, and I look forward to seeing you in an upcoming webinar. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.